if you are in the ego consciousness, the world will seem like it is chaotic. It will be very difficult to make sense of what is happening. Or one will come up with a very distorted theory about what is happening based upon one's projections upon that unfolding experience of the ego, which is always based on those past traumas and obsolete beliefs that have remained within fragments of the ego that will obscure the beauty of the real. And to be free of that obscuration, one must be in the largest, all-pervading sphere of presence that is not under the influence of that unreal perception. From the soul level, you will be aware that everything you perceive is actually nothing but information. Okay? So the first step out of the ego is to recognize that your mind is constructing a world out of pure information. But the information you're receiving is not the same as a world. The ego turns the information into signifiers that are much more gross and primitive oversimplifications of that information. And because the ego is filled with internal conflicts, there will be incoherent intersections of different perspectives on that information, which will produce confusion and indecisiveness and a sense of ambivalence and various other psychological consequences, which all amount to a state of delusion. But if you get the information in its purity and do not turn it into some personal narrative of why is this happening to me, you know, or I'm not good enough for this or that, or I am stuck in this with these particular attachments. I can't let them go, and yet at the same time I have a hostile dependent relationship to them, but I'm identified with those internal self-contradictory attitudes. Those are the bondages of the ego. But when there has been a recognition of the pure information, that will be turned into the knowledge of the real that is the source of that information. So the key to shifting from the ego via the soul to the self is to recognize one absolute variable that is also a constant. And that is this: information is not different from energy. Okay? Energy can be converted into information, and the information can be converted back to energy. They are not different. The information is carried by the waves of the energy through the field. The field and its energy are not two, because the field is the intelligence that produces energy that is then converted by the mental operating system into a world that is simply the imagination's way of interpreting that information. But if you turn it back into the energy of consciousness itself, it becomes light. And the whole world is perceived indeed as light, the light of God present everywhere, that is all-pervading. Regardless of the differences that are perceived when you see through the prism of information, you will see the radiant sameness, not the differences. Both are in superposition at all times, because energy and information are not really different. They are just a different way of perceiving the same reality. And once that is understood, one transcends the dual, let's say, flicker fusion of energy and information, and one realizes that absolute state that gives rise to this noumenal energy, the spanda, if you will. This is the aham vritti, or the aham spurana. This is that initial explosion of Parashakti's expressiveness, but it arises out of that unmanifest real that is both beyond information and beyond energy, and is always in the state of potency of energy, but it does not become kinetic, so there is no activity. It's all the potential of light to appear as a movie. But the source, the implicate order that produces that intelligence, is always beyond and untouched by that emanation of light that becomes information, that becomes egos in a world, in conflict internally and with each other. And all of that is resolved in a single stroke through the reconversion of the information back to the energy and then the source of the energy. So this is the secret of transcending the ego. And it's very easy to do if you're not attached to the ego's misinterpretation of that information. Because once the I thought comes in, that information becomes distorted in accord with the self-interest of that identified entity. And that's why all of the spiritual traditions, if you really follow them to their most esoteric core of their greatest sages, or in the case, let's say, of Christianity, what are called the apophatic mystics, Meister Eckhart being a good example, or those of the third turning of the wheel of Buddha Dharma, or we could go through each tradition, the Shaivite tantric tradition. Those have made it very clear, and they all use the same word, that what appears as a world is nothing, because it's information that is ineffable, and the information is even more ineffable divine light, And that divine light comes from a source that's even more ineffable yet, which has no manifest qualities whatsoever. And once that is understood, that that is the spectrum of consciousness, then one is free to abide in the entirety of the spectrum in non-duality. The non-duality of information, energy, and source. This is the three tiers of consciousness. Now, interestingly, the Buddhist, the Tantric Buddhists of the third turning of the Buddha wheel in Tibet and then later throughout Asia, they changed the idea of the three kayas of the first two turnings, or the second turning of Buddhism, of the Dharmakaya, Sambhogakaya, Nirmanakaya, and they say, no, above the Dharmakaya, there's another more ineffable kaya. And the reason they had to add that is the problem with the Nirmanakaya, or the apparent body in a world, is that the world lacks essence. It has no swabhava, not swabhava. I think swabhava is the correct one. So they added on top of this world that has no swabhava, no essence, no self, a world in which there is the enjoyment of that which is beyond. That's the Buddha nature appearing in the world as the Sambhogakaya, which remains blissful regardless of what happens to Buddha's body in a world, or to any body, because all bodies are in effect Buddha bodies. But then there's the Dharmakaya, which is the intelligence of the cosmos and the unfoldment of this theodrama. But above that is the fourth kaya, or the first really, the Swabhavika kaya. There is essence. It's not in the world, because the world has converted the essence into information and imagination, etc. But that Swabhavika kaya, that's the Buddha nature that they speak of, or the Tathagata Garbha. That is the essence, but it's no thing. It's total essence, fullness, but at the same time, it's nothing. And this is basically the same signified that has arisen to the hesychasts, to the apophatic mystics of Christianity, to the Kabbalists, to the Sufis, of course, and the Taoists, even before everyone else. And so this most ancient understanding has been spread through every branch of spiritual teaching, but hidden behind signifiers of somethingness and of duality and of differentiation, so that one could appeal to a mind that can only think with signifiers of information that has been imaginarized. And it's that level of intelligence that we are here to overcome in order to recognize that we have the power to redream this world of information, to bring new information that comes from the source in that moment when a new emanation, a new dispensation, a new world arises out of the nothingness. So we return to the nothing, which is God, and from the nothing, a new world arises. But it is never anything but that source that is no thing at all.